Welcome back to Sunrise Daily. Well, now we turn our attention to examining the fight against corruption. We're joined now by Wale Adebanwi, who is a professor of political anthropology, University of California. He joins us from the United States. Morning, and thank you for joining us today. You've written several books, journals published about, in fact, you chronicled as well, the fight against corruption. Let's start with your perspective about what you've seen before and what you're seeing now. Any significance or significant difference?
Thank you very much. I think perhaps the greatest significant thing that can be said about what exists now in Nigeria is that we have a president who has personal discipline. We know that as an individual, he has a lot of discipline. That is something that is unusual in our experience. But that's much of what can be said. The environment itself has not changed, but we have a president who has personal discipline, who obviously has shown over the years that he's not personally interested in accumulation. So that is something that is significant. So I think it's important to note that. But the environment is still largely what it is. So there are still, fundamental challenges that we need to face.
What are those challenges, and what should we be doing about them?
The first, I think the greatest challenge, which I think many people in Nigeria love to run away from, is that we still have very, very, very fundamental systemic problems. And until we solve those systemic problems, we will not be able to fully resolve the challenge of corruption. We can't, of course, resolve the challenge of corruption totally. What we can do, and in every society, faces the challenge of corruption, but we can reduce it in Nigeria. But to be able to really reduce corruption, we also need to face our systemic problems. And those fundamental systemic problems, one can argue that much of the corruption also are consequences of those systemic problems. For instance, we have created and sustained a system that makes it possible for people to be able to steal money and to be able to get away with it. We have instruments, and institutions that, that the anti-corruption instruments and anti-corruption institutions that have been able to do a lot, particularly the EFCC. And as you mentioned, I have written a book on the Ribadu era at the EFCC. The institution was able to do a lot within a particular period. But when you look at even the instruments and instrumentalities that were available to him, they also considered a lot of clogs, on the wheel of progress. For instance, just let's examine the punishment for corruption. I mean, it's as Fela Anikulapo Kuti reminds us. I mean, someone will steal something very small and they will go to jail for 15 years, and somebody steals billions and is able to go to jail for 2 years and get out. So those are challenges that we need to resolve, but we cannot resolve all those challenges if, as I said, we also don't resolve fundamental problems. Let me tell you one of those fundamental problems, the structural problems that we have in the country, which makes it possible for people to be able to hang on to all sorts of identities when they are faced with corruption allegations. So people are able to rally around them from different kinds of identities, and they're able to get away with some of these things. So we need to resolve those kinds of fundamental problems that makes it possible to use identity politics to escape from corruption charges.
All right, let me bring some of this to you and see if it speaks to any of those systemic or fundamental problems that you highlighted. Now we've got the bank verification numbers, which links all the accounts that people have got to one. If they key in your name somewhere, any account associated with you pops up. Then secondly, you've got the National Identity Management, the organization, they are bringing in your identity. They can locate you with that one. And then you also do have the Administration of Criminal Justice Act. I think they spoke about the Penal Code and the Criminal Code, ensuring no unnecessary stay of proceedings. Cases can go on a little faster than they used to, so that you don't go to court and expect 3-4 years you're still dealing with one case if it happens to be a corruption. Don't all of this speak to those challenges you've mentioned?
Yes, they actually speak to the procedures and instruments and instrumentalities that I mentioned that we need to strengthen, and we need to work on that. And I do have confidence. I haven't done some work on the EFCC under Ribadu, and the present head of the EFCC, Magu, was one of the strongest aides that Ribadu had at that time, and I do have a lot of confidence in him. But as we experience under Ribadu, we need to be able to recreate the environment itself. And so all these points that you have raised will help in pursuing this. But beyond that, to go back to the systemic problem that I mentioned, the fundamental issues, we now have a country, and this has been so for quite a while, but it's really been much worse in the last few years, where so many people are unable to find jobs, where those who find jobs are not getting salaries, where people who are getting paid have to use their money to sustain so many people. So you have an environment which invites people constantly to have to reach out beyond their legitimate earnings. So we've got to also do something about that concurrently. If we're fighting corruption, we also have to ensure that we create a society in which people are able to find legitimate means to be able to sustain, to live and live very well. So those are issues that we need to confront. And there are structural issues about Nigeria which has also encouraged the kind of corruption that we have experienced. So we need to also attend to those structural issues. These are structural issues that I think the present government has not actually shown any kind of willingness to confront. And unless and until we confront that, corruption will continue to be only one of the manifestations of those structural problems. So even if we're doing something about corruption without doing something about the structural crisis, we'll find that in the end, we'll lose the war on corruption if we don't do something about the fundamental basis that actually predispose many people to steal money and get away with it. And, an environment in which, as long as a thief is our thief, it's not a thief.
Very quickly, you use the word stealing now. That takes us to your book you wrote, Authority Stealing, and perhaps looking at what has happened in Nigeria's post-military era. What exactly were you looking into when you used the word, as coined then by the late Afrobeat maestro Fela Anikulapo Kuti in your book, Authority Stealing? Is it just about those in political office or some other Nigerians somewhere?
That's actually a fundamental basis. And the point that Fela was making in that song, which was the reason why I used that title, was basically to say, look, we have a systemic rot. The people at the top are the biggest rogues, which was, Fela's argument. But we don't pay attention to that. We don't punish these people, but we constantly punish the little thieves, which is why in the song he talks about, in one street corner, somebody steals something and everybody shouts, rogue, 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 thief, thief, thief. But when you have this big man who has stolen millions, people don't shout rogue. So the essential point is to look at that, the core of corruption in society. But beyond that, in the book, and which was part of the remit of the EFCC, I also looked at, other areas, such as 419, which was one of the major areas in which the Ribadu-led EFCC was able to achieve a lot. I mean, if that pattern had continued for a while, it really helped to improve Nigeria's image, because they were able to deal with the biggest, 419 kingpins, as they call them, and many of them were arrested and prosecuted. But unfortunately, because that process was truncated, eventually we lost that. So, but the essential core of the focus of the book is actually about the corruption in high places. And as you have seen in the last few days or couple of weeks now, we've been hearing about revelations about the ways in which the Nigerian exchequer was turned into the personal account of some people who were just dispersing huge sums of money to people to do things that were not particularly within.
Doesn't that give you some sense of, should I say, sense of faith in the system that things just might be working? Now that you just reminded us what happened during the Ribadu era, perhaps what you just highlighted now, what's happening in the country at the moment, doesn't that give you some sense of hope?
Oh yes, it gives hope, but what I think one of the most important things that the president said in the budget speech is that, when he made a promise and then said, you can say that you have had that before. And I thought that was very brilliant. That was a very brilliant line. I mean, that's something very good that those who wrote the speech for him actually added. So indeed, we've seen this before, but eventually that process was, truncated. So we have a situation in which if what is going on now is sustained, we will certainly get to a situation in which we can say, well, when people steal money, especially this kind of huge sums of money, that will be punished. But how can we sustain it? Do we have a political culture? Do we have institutions that would ensure that this process is actually, carried to the point that we would expect that?
We'll come back. We'll come back to looking at the institutions very quickly. But again, if you look at it, coming back to what is playing out now, is there a correlation to what also you highlighted about 2013, talking about the nature of friendship and corruption, for instance, what we're seeing now? Because it would seem as if almost everyone and anyone, even the 419 issue you talked about, still revolves around some people who are also within the same clique.
Oh, certainly. Yes, I mean, it's also about the political culture that I mentioned earlier. We've created a system in which, the system is only sustainable on the basis of grand corruption. So we need also to demobilize that system that creates the conditions for people to be able to, create and sustain elaborate, schemes and scams that have become the ways in which we run the society. And one of the challenges that I think the president will face as he goes along is there are all sorts of powerful networks within the country that would eventually challenge all these processes. And they have done so in the past and they won. So how can we ensure that in this case, when those powerful interests also challenge this new process that has been started or perhaps restarted by President Buhari, that that he and the government would be able to confront these forces and be able to defeat them? That I think is the challenge.
All right, if you could sum it up for us, are we progressing or retrogressing?
I wish I could say that we are progressing. Unfortunately, I don't think so. We have an opportunity to do so under the present arrangement. But up till this moment, including even the budget speech, I do not find the evidence for a lot of confidence. I mean, certainly there are gestures within this, within the speech that speak to the possibility of progress. But I ask myself, what are the building blocks for ensuring that? I do not see them yet. I hope you will be able to see that in the years ahead.
All right, Wale Adebanwi, Professor of Political Anthropology, University of California. Thank you very much indeed for talking to us today.
Thank you.
All right, so there you go. That's a wrap with that particular segment. And we should be able to take a comment or two before we draw the curtains here today on the program. Yes, we have send your comments as it did scroll. Okay, well, I guess we'll have to just let it go. But again, we'd like to just thank you all for watching and for keeping faith with us, especially as we picked up the 10th one. All thanks to you all. I will thank you for watching again today. We'll be back next time. I'm Chamberlain Osal.
Many thanks for being such nice company. I'm Sulaiman Alede.